Hello, everyone. Today I thought I would revisit an older video that I made back in September of 2020 called Deck Delights and Deterrents. And I thought this would be a fun exercise to see how my tastes might or might not have changed based on that video where I list the delights, so themes or characteristics of a deck that really draw me in versus deterrents, which are characteristics that really put me off and make me reconsider buying a deck. So have I evolved or maybe not so much? Let's find out. So starting off with the deck delights, the first characteristic that I had mentioned was human themed decks. And that definitely has not changed. A majority of the decks in my collection continue to be human themed. I like people in my decks. I like seeing their faces and their expressions and their postures and where they're set in a scene, what they're wearing, all of those little details. So essentially, decks that are more like place-centric, just some decks that come to mind, like Tarot of Oneness, which I know it's beautiful and it's really popular right now. The Spacious Tarot is another one. Augenblick Tarot. Essentially, all the place-centric decks that Sarah from Sunset Bow Tarot has in her collection, because that is a favorite theme of hers, those decks are not in my collection. And then branching out from that, the second delight that I had listed was actually the big head, big-eyed girls, aka the bobbleheads. That has not changed. In my original video, I had shown Jasmine Beckett Griffith's Alice Oracle. And this time I'm going to show the tarot that I created based on public domain images from JBG called the Notorious JBG Tarot. Yeah, I know this is not for everyone, but I don't know, I just really love these huge bobbleheads. Although I will say, now that I think about it, because I created a tarot deck based on these images that really works for me, I also created my own oracle deck called the JBG Oracle. I have to say I don't have a lot of JBG decks in my collection. I have, my two. And then I think the Lay Vampires Oracle is the only other oracle that I have at this point of hers, and that was a gift. So it's really interesting. I don't, I love her artwork, but given that I have, created for myself decks that really work for me, I don't feel the need to buy any more of her oracle decks. And I think she even has a Halloween themed deck that she is going to be, I think it's going to be available soon. I don't know if it already is. It might be like a pre-order thing. And that looks cool, but I'm okay without it for now, I think. So yeah, this is just one example. I do also have the Tactile Tarot, which I kind of put in a similar category. Okay, so the next delight that I had listed was bright or pastel color scheme. And that also has not changed. So one example of the bright color scheme would be the Star Tarot. This is first edition. And I went ahead and modified this to chop off the huge borders and then edge them in the different colors. So it looks like based on this, I put them back in order. But yeah, this is definitely a good example of the type of deck that has just a lot of color going on. It's very vibrant. A lot of details too. So this might be a little too much for some people, but I really love it. I mean, some of the images could be like what Krista from Auntie Kay's Tarot, she calls it rainbow puke. And I would say that this could easily fall into that category. They're so pretty. Yeah. So this is just one of many kind of colorful decks that I have. An example of a pastel color scheme deck that I have is the Ethereal Visions Luna Edition. I definitely prefer this one to the other version, which has more like beiges and like a warmer color scheme. But you know I am a whore for purple, and so this was a no-brainer. And then the holographic foiling on top of the purple pastels, chef's kiss. Now, this is just a really pretty deck. The next delight that I had listed was fantasy/old world themed decks, and that also has not changed. That theme probably remains one of like my top favorites and one that I will never be sick of. So the two decks that I've just showed you, I think, are good examples that would fall into that category of like fantasy or old world themed decks. Next delight that I had mentioned was good photo manipulation. And in my original video, I had shown Tarot de la Nuit and the Rusted Lenormand. So decks that are well done in terms of like digital manipulation, in terms of stylizing stock photography. And yeah, I would say that that is still something that I enjoy. I think that I had listed that back in 2020 because that was kind of like this newfound delight that I had not thought would be something that attracted me toward a deck, but actually it was. Now, from 2020 to this point, I can't say that I have acquired a lot more decks that do use photo manipulation, but I do still enjoy a good stock photography deck, and this is one example, which is a Page of Cats Tarot. So I think this is out of print. This was created by Tina, Queen of Wands, on Instagram, although I don't think she's active anymore as on that account. But she created this cat-themed deck from photography, and I think she just did such a great job. So I will say I am pretty selective about the types of decks that I acquire when it comes to photography or photo manipulation. But when they're done and they're done well, I just really enjoy them and have an appreciation for them for sure. Look at that. Ooh. And then the final delight that I had mentioned back in 2020 was pip style decks. And I would say that that is still a delight. So this is my Inspired Soul Tarot. And I think that, like the previous delight that I had mentioned with the photo manipulation, I think that the reason that I had put pip style decks on that list is because well, I mean, 2020, I had just created this deck that very year and was definitely getting into learning more about pips. And that was a huge impetus for why I created this deck, which was to immerse myself in the whole like pip deck experience, create a deck and thereby learn more from that. And I was acquiring more pipish decks. So I would say it's still a delight, but I would say not as strong of one. Meaning that, so I did my own kind of version of March of the Pips a few months ago, and I had a good number of pip decks and felt like I really didn't need any more. I think that fully illustrated decks will always be kind of my number one preference. And given that that's the case, I do think that while I still enjoy pip decks, I have enough that I don't seek them out. And once again, I am pretty selective about what those pip decks look like. Along with these delights, I wanted to add 2 new ones. And one of them, which I have mentioned before in other videos, is glossy cardstock. And I know I'm in the minority, but there's just something about a good glossy cardstock. So this is the, I don't even know the name of this. I don't know that there's an official name to this, but this is a glossy RWS deck, and I just love everything about the gloss on this. Yeah, it's a pain in the ass to film or take pictures with, but I have plenty of other decks that are matte, and there's just something about gloss. It's just great visually. It's great in terms of tactile experience. I just really like gloss. Another one that I've really been enjoying with some good gloss factor is this Oracle deck right here. I've talked about this one many a times in previous videos, the Wisdom of the Wild Things Oracle. So you can see there's some gloss there and just really like it. I think gloss works especially well when it comes to colored decks. Decks that have a use of different colors, bright colors. I think the gloss just makes them all the more vibrant and makes them pop. And so I think that this was a great deck choice to make glossy. Once again, I realize I'm in the minority here, but I am loving me a good glossy cardstock. And then another new delight that I wanted to mention is mini decks. So I feel like in the last few years, publishers have been coming out with like decks like this or like pocket decks, and I am not mad at that at all. I love me mini anything, and so yes, give me all the mini tarot decks. I know they have one in this size for Everyday Witch. Haven't gotten that one yet. I'm tempted, I gotta say, because this is such a a precious, just charming size. They also have one, I think, for Darkwood. But do I really need to be getting a mini for decks that I already have? I'm not sure. So it's just a really cute size. That's all I can say. And then, this is more like a pocket size, which is the Light Seers. I had a full-size version of this deck, and I just really hated the cardstock. But now having the mini version, so you can see, well, it's I guess a little bit bigger than the Chicoli. It's still pretty small. Anyway, they call it pocket. So I have found this way better to work with because of the size. And it's nice and portable. I have other minis that are like minier. I mean, we're talking like that small, but I wouldn't quite call them usable decks. I mean, I guess you could. You could throw them in like a bowl or something and kind of swoosh them around and use them. But yeah, I don't mind at all expanding my mini deck collection. And now we move on to my deck deterrents. I call them deterrents and not deal breakers because as soon as I call something a deal breaker, I know I'm going to be eating my own words. I even have decks that definitely fall into these categories of deterrents that I'm going to be talking about. The first one, bad tactile experience. So I had mentioned thick cardstock, overly large cards, rose petal finish. Yes, those still very much apply. Rose petal finish. Your girl is still not going to be throwing like cornstarch and shit like that on her decks to try to use a rose petal finish deck. I'm just not. I'm too lazy. Was too lazy then. I'm still too lazy now. You know, the thick cardstock and the overly large cards, yeah, it's still a deterrent. I mean, I have now like a dice method that I use. So I have to really love a deck. I have to really, really love the imagery. There are components about that deck that must really win me over hard for me to consider a deck that has a really thick cardstock or that are overly large. I mean, Oracle decks, of course, are an exception because those are just overall, in general, they're going to be larger cards, larger than tarot. That's usually the format. But there are also there are fewer cards, so that kind of is the trade-off there. So again, not always a deal breaker, but still a pretty strong deterrent. Another deterrent that I would mention to tack on to the tactile no-nos would be sharp edging and gilding. Trend now is to have gilding or edging on everything, and I am not about that. I wish they would just cool it with all of the edging. This is an example of a deck that had silver, metallic silver gilt edging. This is Tarot of Mystical Moments. And well, given that the deck is larger in size, in tarot size, that was hard enough as it was, but then to have this sharp edging, or at least it was sharp for me, it just really put me off initially. But I love the deck so much that I was willing to go through the effort of actually trimming off the silver edging. And so now it feels so much better. But let me tell you, I am now even lazier and lazier about doing tarot deck modifications. So I've really got to love a deck if I'm going to go through the effort of trimming off gilding. So yeah, that is one trend that I kind of wish would go away. Okay, the next deterrent that I had mentioned was initials and names on the backs of cards. So that must have been a trend that I was seeing around that time or up till that time that was apparently chafing my ass. And I have to say, I don't see that as much anymore. So I think that publishers and deck creators have finally gotten the memo that most of us don't love having like text or initials on the backs of our cards. Now, of course, exceptions are to be made. I have the Darkwood Tarot here that has the the initials of the deck name. I mean, even though I don't read reversals, I mean, the cards are reversible. And so I think this was done in a way that was meant for the initials to be more subtle, and it lends to this kind of, illustrative pattern here, so it's not so in your face. So I think that's all right. I don't mind that at all. Another exception I have is the Blythe Tarot. So the backs of these have this border that repeat sleep forever. And that is the name of the creator's shop, as well as her Instagram handle. And again, this one, because it runs together like a border and the font is thin, it's more subtle. And so this I don't mind, because if I'm not looking too closely, it just looks like, a stylized border. So this one's all right too. Okay, next deterrent, images of human figures with non-human things sprouting from their necks. Yeah, this is still a hard no. This is still a hard deterrent. So you have images of human bodies, but then they have some type of like oak tree freaking sprouting out of their neck, or some, I don't know, inanimate object that just doesn't make any sense for it to be the head of that figure. I still don't get it, and I still don't like it. And even animal heads on human bodies. So that one deck from Chris Ann, Curious Creatures, I just can't. Now when you have it the other way around, like for instance, this card here, this is from the Hush Tarot. A human head on an animal body, like that doesn't bother me as much. So any type of like harpy or mermaid or centaur or, whatever other creature figure where there's a human head on an animal body, I can make allowances. But the other way around, no. Okay, this next deterrent, I gotta say off the bat, I can't really call this a deterrent anymore, and that is animal-themed decks. And I had said in my original video, especially if they're highly anthropomorphized. And I did also list some exceptions, which were, unicorn decks, cat decks, the, animals mixed in with humans, that's fine. Or if the animals are anthropomorphized, they're done in such a way that it's very kind of storybook. It's more like Aesop's fable. It's more folktale. It reminds me of like picture books that I had as a kid. So those were the exceptions. But I would say that I have to kind of strike this off the deterrence list, because I have, since the time of that video, definitely acquired more animal decks, and I'm just now leaning into it. I even talk about it in a VR to Heather's video. She shows off her animal deck collection, which is pretty sizable, given that she was also one who kept saying that she wasn't into animal decks. And yeah, I fell in that same boat, constantly saying wasn't into animal decks. And yet I had acquired, by that point, quite a few animal decks. I mean, my cat deck collection has definitely expanded. And I have acquired decks like this one, which is the Thistledown Oracle. And this is one of those decks that, to me, has a very kind of storybook quality to the way these animals are illustrated. And that's what draws me in so much to Adam Oler's artwork. So my animal deck collection has definitely grown. And I think it's because I've also learned what it is that I look for in an animal deck, which I've definitely talked about in past videos. Probably like the three girls, we've talked about this, where, you know, I like animal decks where it's not necessarily, there's not a huge focus on animal archetype as it is these animals in scenarios that are indicative of each card archetype, if that makes sense. And it's not necessarily a focus of, okay, rabbit, what does this archetype exemplify? But I have to say that, you know, the one that does come to mind that leans into that is the Woodland Wardens. That is one where it does focus on the actual animal. But that one, I don't know, that one doesn't bother me because it's both animal and plant focused, like they're paired together, an animal with the plant. I don't know enough about the different animal archetypes to have strong feelings. So, and Woodland Wardens was a gift. So that one ended up working out well for me. And so that has remained in my collection because that one works just fine. But in general, I guess I definitely lean more towards animal decks like this. Next deterrent. I said Marseille decks. And that, I think, is still a deterrent. The traditional kind of old school Marseille decks, you know what I mean? Like the Italian style with like the garish primary colors. I have other Marseille style decks that deviate from that. Like for instance, we have the new classic Taroki by Mr. Freeborg. So here's an example that, you know, it's definitely, you know, Marseille leaning, but with a twist. And the characters have skeletal faces. You know, the colors are different. Style of the pips. Definitely my cup of tea. The way these pips are illustrated, they're just so beautiful. So Marseille like this, I get on board with. The traditional Marseille, just still not for me. So along with this one, I do have like the Squid Cake Marseille, I have the Terre Sereine. But even then, you know, my collection is limited in terms of Marseille. But then moving on to my very last deterrent that I had mentioned was pip decks that use Roman numerals. Yes, that is still a huge deterrent of mine. When it comes to just pip decks in particular, the minors, which is why this deck and the Squid Cake Marseille just really appeal to me because both these decks use Arabic numerals for their minors. And I love that. When it comes to looking at pip images like this, having to contend with Roman numerals is just one more thing for my brain to spaz out on. Like I'm more than capable, but it just takes me a minute longer, which then makes me low-key cranky, and I like my readings to go a little more quickly than that. So yeah, I'm an Arabic numeral girl when it comes to pip decks. Just is what it is for me. So that is why this Mr. Freeborg deck, just one of the reasons why it appealed to me. So I have only one new deterrent that came to mind that I'd want to add to this list, and that would be fandom decks. And I've talked about this before, where or at least the fandom decks that I'm seeing lately, they leave a lot to be desired. Those Insight Edition decks, namely, those are the ones that come to mind because they have been just the top publisher for creating these kind of pop culture fandom decks. Now, this is not to say that I wouldn't buy a fandom deck just for like collection purposes. If it was a fandom that just was really close to my heart, then okay, perhaps. And it was well done. That's the thing. If it were well done, I could see myself buying it for collection purposes, not necessarily to use. But I have definitely talked about before that fandom decks tend to kind of limit the way that I use the tarot. I mean, not all the time, but I'm just finding that tends to be the common problem that I have. Because a lot of times these decks show very particular scenes. And when that happens, it tends to really cage me in, and that's all I can think about then. All I can think about is, say, that episode, that particular story arc, and that then has the potential to limit the way that I do a reading. So I do tend to stay away from fandom decks. Of course, there are exceptions to every rule, and therefore I must predictably show you the Bangtan Tarot, which is a collaboration deck between me, Sarah from Sunset Bow Tarot, and Heather. And this is an exception because we created this deck. And so, of course, it is going to work for me 100%. Also, a photography deck, actually. So this one, and I want to say the only other fandom deck that I have that comes to mind is the Game of Thrones Tarot. That one I have used. That one does read well. I don't use it all that much these days. It's actually been so long since I've last used that deck. But yeah, this one and Game of Thrones are really the only two that come to mind that I have. So thank you so much for joining me in this little exercise. I would say that my tastes have remained relatively the same. I would say the only larger shift would be my story around animal decks. I've definitely changed my tune on that as a deterrent. But the rest, I feel pretty solid, and that they, for the most part, are still my deck delights and deterrents. Let me know some of your deck delights and deterrents in the comments below, and how they've changed over time, or maybe not changed so much. Maybe they've remained relatively the same. Thanks so much as always, and hope you all are well. Much love and take care.